Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast. My name is Philip Heidson, a 20-year procurement practitioner, former head of procurement and advisor to procurement leaders around the world. I started Art of Procurement to help leaders and their teams access the resources they need to increase their impact through insight-driven procurement. You are listening to our flagship podcast where we pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics and tools that leading procurement teams are using to align their impact with the needs of their business. According to a recent industry survey that recently came across my desk, it's the Procurement 2021 Pulse Check by WNS Denali and ProcureCon Europe. Only 9% of CPOs are satisfied with the current level of stakeholder alignment in their organization. I mean, that's kind of crazy. 9%. Here we are in 2021. I was so surprised by that number as I read through the report that I thought I'd focus on this as today's Art of Procurement episode. It feels like we as procurement leaders have really fretted about this as a leading challenge for years in procurement, stakeholder alignment. In fact, I recently went into my folder of old procurement reports that I keep. It goes all the way back to 2007 to see it was the number one challenge for procurement teams even back then. At Art of Procurement, aligning procurement's capabilities with the needs of the business, essentially stakeholder alignment, is really one of the main reasons that we exist. The good news from this survey is that 62% of respondents, and it's from a cross-section of over 100 global procurement execs who took the survey in late 2020, they plan to do something to increase alignment over and above what they did do last year. And it's interesting to see that we're starting to get some data on the role of procurement during the pandemic. Anecdotes that the survey team took from the face-to-face interviews they did that accompanied the survey suggests that the biggest problem was not necessarily alignment of one-off projects, so a sourcing project, for example, aligning with the needs of the business and the stakeholder, but actually staying engaged beyond individual projects is the problem. So it's essentially the old reactive versus proactive conundrum. How do we proactively align our capabilities with the needs of the business without being subservient to them? After all, a procurement team that does everything the business asks will be 100% aligned, and that's definitely not the goal, as we talk about a lot. Add into the mix an even greater need to do more with less, plus increasing demand on project-based sourcing that I'm seeing across most companies right now, that becomes a tough nut to crack. Now, if we dig deeper into the report, it suggests that actually 38% of respondents are fine with the status quo. And I'm not sure if that's because of apathy or whether that's because they're overwhelmed. But, it was an interesting data point to come out that despite all of this and despite being unhappy, almost half are just okay to do business as usual. But one of those 62%, the rest of the respondents who said they were going to invest more time or money in improving stakeholder alignment actually doing about this, or what they plan on doing about this in 2021. And their tactics fit broadly into four categories from the report. The first category is increasing investment in talent and capability building. So I could certainly do a series of episodes on this. What I do hope is that this doesn't just involve scheduling a few ad hoc training courses, but looks deeper into capability frameworks and takes more of a programmatic approach to increasing the capabilities or skills necessary for procurement to succeed in this environment. One of the things that I do see is that those who are dipping their toe into the water of training look at training programs as kind of a, we just need to bring somebody in for a day or two and everything will be fixed. That is obviously going to help some people be a little bit more effective in some skills at a certain moment in time, but it's not going to change the structural kind of dynamics of the talent of your team and the impact that they can have over the long term. So really important to take a programmatic view of this. Always, I recommend starting with a capability framework and not necessarily a capability framework that just is one of, something that you may find online, a standard kind of industry capability framework. To be really impactful, it's got to be built so it matches the needs. What does your organization need from procurement? And that may be very different than what something from, an industry generalist tells you that a capability framework should look like. Now, the number two area is investing in more knowledge management. And I do really love this. I've always advised procurement teams, and you've heard it on the show many, many times, that they have to show up to meetings with stakeholders or prospective stakeholders with insights that go beyond what a stakeholder may have. Doing that immediately positions you as a strategic resource, gives you that seat at the table, as much as I don't really like that term, but it gives you that seat at the table that you can use to listen about your stakeholders' vision, objectives, challenges, and opportunities. If you show up to those meetings and you don't really have those insights, you show up basically saying, "Hey, I'm procurement. What can I do for you?" They're going to look at you as being very tactical or transactional. You can help me save a little bit more time or help get something done quicker, but you're not going to be able to help me with my strategic decision making. That's what data, showing up with information, that investment in knowledge management really brings. I think what's important here, though, is that knowledge that you invest in has to be contextualized or is contextualized by your team. I talked about this in the first bit about capability building and capability frameworks. But one of the things I see from organizations is buying off-the-shelf industry market intelligence reports and then repurposing it to stakeholders as kind of insight without context. And so a lot of those reports are great starting points, if you don't have a lot of data, but that's all they are. They're industry specific. They're not, based on the situation of your organization, the leverage that you may have, the situation that you may have, the details of what you buy. So oftentimes they're not a lot of use unless you can contextualize them. The third area of investment is a continued investment in digital transformation. This, one, it should be no surprise, but two, this is such an exciting time in the procurement technology space. In fact, at our upcoming Mastermind Live event in a couple of weeks here, we're actually going to be talking about this in more detail. We're going to shine a light on some of the market dynamics and venture capital inflows into various segments of the procurement tech market. So for those procurement teams that are more mature, there are many ways to leverage this new technology to increase their impact. For those closer to the beginning of their journey, I can't say too often how important it is to improve the purchase to pay user experience. It's really easy to go in and say, let's go and do something that's really super. We've got a blank piece of paper. But I've seen firsthand examples recently where relatively simple processes and tech improvements on the P2P side transform the perception of procurement. A lot of times when you don't have a tech stack, the perception of procurement is based on the P2P process. The reality is that 90% of people in an organization that touch procurement only do so through the P2P process. And if that's broken, even though it's part of the process that may reside not in procurement, but in finance or in shared services, if that's broken, they still look at procurement as a problem child versus somebody who can help them with opportunities. I would say that, like I say, even if it's in finance or shared services, you can't devolve yourself of responsibility because the perception is that it's still a procurement problem, even if that's not the case. And of course, that perception is reality. Now, the fourth area that folks are looking to invest in to help increase their stakeholder alignment, and this one is really interesting to me. It's 80% of those who responded to the survey and are investing in changes are investing in an updated operating model. And I really am excited about this. I've been advocating for an updated operating model for a number of years. And it's not just become a nice to have, but a reality. And actually, it's been accelerated by COVID. Why I'm so excited? Well, one of the reasons is because, selfishly, an area of my work as a practitioner, but today as a consultant, I really enjoy is operating model design. And actually, when I started out of procurement, I started a consulting company at probably 3 months before out of procurement that was called ProcureChange, that was really focused on operating model design. So it's really great to see that organizations are now looking a little bit past the traditional org designs. And the report itself digs a little deeper on operating models. It finds that just over 1 of 10 large enterprise CPOs are satisfied with their current operating model for procurement. That's pretty amazing. Although in a way, it's not surprising because of how difficult change can often be in those large enterprises. So it's one thing to see that you would like a different operating model. Another thing altogether, of course, to be able to plan and deliver and execute on a new operating model. Based on conversations that I have regularly with CPOs of mid-sized companies, I know that operating model design is definitely becoming increasingly important to them too. Again, this means different things to different teams and where they are on their procurement maturity journey. So a procurement lead for a small company, say up to $500 million in revenue, has the least flexibility because they may have a small team of 1 to 5 people not a lot of opportunity to slice and dice their roles and responsibilities. Most of those team members are doing everything from end to end in relation to supporting their stakeholders, although category management has probably been skipped in favor of more tactical sourcing execution and perhaps some strategic sourcing and some post-sourcing contract management. When you look at mid-sized companies that are less mature in their operating model, they at least have the scale to separate tactical and strategic activities. And that's something that the report mentioned. That's a great first step. Those that are more mature and have implemented category management, they may have done this across most categories, but they may have done it with generalists rather than domain specialists. And so they're struggling to bring those insights we talked about when we said about knowledge management that go beyond what a stakeholder already knows, or certainly to do that at scale. You may have one or two individuals who really know their stuff, but it's harder to scale that across the entire organization. And so they find themselves with some categories where there is full strategic involvement and the rest, most typically, where it's mostly tactical, process-based type of support. And then for larger companies, when you're thinking about operating models, they may already have experts across most of the categories and have separated tactical and strategic work. A key next step we see is to take more of a portfolio approach to providing procurement services to each part of the business. So what I mean by that is in those large companies, you often have many different business lines or operating units, all of which have very different needs from a procurement support perspective. Now, it's pretty typical as we grow procurement organizations, while, there may be some intentionality not to do it this way, you end up providing a service that looks a little bit like a one size fits all across all the different business units. So kind of that next step is to reflect on the support you provide on an individual business line basis, look at the different performance measures, and see if you essentially need to be building individual procurement offerings, if you will, for each one of those business units based on what they actually need from procurement, so that you're fully aligned with each one of those business units, because that one size fits all model ultimately leads to misalignment, because you may build it for the loudest stakeholder or the one that's the biggest advocate for you, the one that maybe has the greatest area of spend at the beginning, but that doesn't necessarily fit everybody else. And so, again, that leads to often a lot of misalignment with different business units. Now, the report also talked, when it comes to operating model design, about outtasking and outsourcing as a potential solution for organizations really of all sizes. And this is something that you've heard me advocate about for a long time based on my experience. So in preparation for the time that I spent in India leading a captive procurement shared services center, I read a book by Thomas Friedman, and it's always stuck with me. It was called The World is Flat. And it talked, the bit that really resonated with me, it talked about the unbundling of a job, with parts of the job being delivered by whoever, wherever in the world it was the lowest cost and the most effective. So you would ultimately have pockets of expertise around the world around certain tasks where it made most sense from a efficiency and a cost perspective for that kind of centralization of talent and expertise to do that task where it made sense for that to be located. And fast forward almost 15 years now from when I did that and when I read that book, you can now add technology and automation to the mix. So it's not necessarily just where the people are located, but taking tasks out and automating them using technology because it's lower cost to do that. My point is that if you look at your own organization with this mindset, performing this analysis really provides some significant opportunities to improve your operating model, whether that's by using internal resources or external resources. The answer to that question more often sits within your own internal business culture than it being one of a business case or a capability. As I ran outsourcing engagements, that was always the biggest determinant of success or failure, was culture. And so such an important thing to get right, whether you decide, I'm going to build this using internal resources or external ones. If you go external and you're not sure about the culture, then really heavy change management is needed, because, again, that's an area where things often fall down. So let's bring this full circle and back to the overriding question of stakeholder alignment. And I want to leave today's mini pod with a bit of a question. How aligned is your procurement function with your business? And alignment doesn't mean that they tell you that you do a great job. I sometimes hear that, from leaders who tell me, we're really well aligned with our business because our business likes everything we do and they get on well with us and we have no complaints. You really need to go deeper than that, because the hard truth is that a lot of the times that a stakeholder group tells you that you do a good job is because they don't really know what to expect from you. Or perhaps they're happy that you're not getting too involved in their business so that they're able to keep you kind of at arm's length. So survey them, interview them, run focus groups, even bring in some outsider to have those conversations if you think it will help those stakeholders be more open. But having that baseline, much like baselining your current costs at the start of a sourcing project, that makes the strategy and execution phases so much easier as you're thinking about improving or transforming your procurement function. Because if you do that from a place where you're all aligned at the very beginning, obviously you have that same baseline. Even if that alignment and that baseline is that you're not aligned, at least everybody is on the same page. Well, I want to thank you for listening to today's Art of Procurement podcast. This is a topic, as you can see, that I'm really passionate about. And it just really sparked some thoughts that I wanted to share with you when I read this report. I'm going to include a link in the show notes to the report that I mentioned today. It's called Procurement Pulse Check, Top Priorities for 2021, Alignment and Impact. And the show notes will be at artofprocurement.com/episode 388. That's artofprocurement.com/388. All right, what's next? So coming up on the pod, we have another CPO interview next week discussing how to make an impact in a decentralized organization. I just impacted Kate Vitasek on the latest book in her Vested series that discusses writing, implementing, and governing formal relational style contracts. And we have a special series I'm really excited to share that's going to run every 2 weeks for over the course of 6 episodes, digging deeper into data and the data ecosystems. And that's definitely a key challenge of the Art of Procurement audience. So thanks for listening in today. Again, show notes are going to be at artofprocurement.com/episode 388, along with a link to download the copy of the report. Until next time, I hope you all stay safe. I want to thank you for listening into today's episode of The Art of Procurement. To go deeper, including access to transcripts and actionable outtakes from the podcast, join the free level of our AOP Mastermind community. To learn more, go to artofprocurement.com/mastermind. And to find our entire back catalogue of almost 400 episodes, go to artofprocurement.com/podcast.